Hello, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. Welcome back to the next portion of our 2020 food forest tour. I'm doing a comprehensive tour of all parts of our permaculture property in Portland, Oregon, where we have 1/4 acre and we are in USDA Zone 8B. You can look in the description for links to the previous sections of the tour. We just finished the first part of the chicken run here, where I also keep my bees. And then we just finished the second part down here, which ended in the chicken coop, which you can see right there. And we are now going to do the third portion of the chicken run. When I say chickens, we have chickens and ducks. I have a permit for 12 poultry. In Portland, you have to have a permit for more than 3 birds. And I think they're reworking that law, so they're going to change it to 4. But I do have a lifetime permit for 12 birds. And I also have a permit for my bees. So everything here is by the book. Okay, so the poultry have access to 1 to 2 sections of this run at a time, and that allows a section or 2 to rest and regenerate so that the chickens don't damage it too heavily. So this area that we're going into has been at rest, and the chickens were rotated through here for a couple of weeks, and now it's resting again. So it's starting to recover, and that allows some weeds to start germinating. It allows bugs to migrate back in, and it allows my perennials to kind of recover a little bit from any damage the chickens and ducks might have done. And then I'll turn the chickens and ducks back in here, and they will get rid of the weeds that are sprouting, and they'll get rid of the bugs again. So we're going to go through this gate that keeps my standard poodles out and keeps my chickens enclosed in. And all of our gates are made from scrounged free stuff. So this one is made from a pallet. I really like wooden wire gates. It lets the sun shine in, and they're a lot more lightweight. And then when the wood deteriorates, you can reuse the wire. So free stuff, big fan of free stuff. I'm a big fan of growing clematis and roses up over. Anything that is a vertical structure, I will be growing plants on. Right here, as we go into this part of the garden, you can see the filbert, which is quite large. It was planted by a squirrel. It was here when we bought the house, and I coppice it for firewood. So let's go in here, take a little look. Now, I've talked about this in a previous video with my raspberries. I am a big fan of permaculture. I have been practicing permaculture since I discovered it at age 18, when in Grinnell College in Iowa, I was connected with the Women Food and Agriculture Network. And that was really transformative for me. I learned about permaculture design and design principles, and there's a lot of philosophies in permaculture and a lot of design concepts that folks can cling to really rigidly. And I know I talk about this a lot in my videos, but permaculture is site specific, and permaculture is about reducing labor, increasing sustainability, increasing yields for people and for nature. And therefore, we don't want to be so bound to design strategies that they become oppressive. So we want to have the flexibility to utilize design strategies that benefit our site, but also know enough about the property that we're on to know what will work and won't work. And not just the property, but also to know enough about our habits as people using the property to know what will be effective and what won't. So in permaculture, we talk about zones, and there are zones starting with the house, zone 0, and then zone 1, where you are coming right out your back door and you're utilizing things frequently. And the bigger the numbers get up to zone 5, the less frequently you visit that area of the garden, so that zone 5 is complete wilderness. And I've mentioned this before, but if you live in a suburban or urban permaculture area, your zone 4 and 5 particularly may not be on your property. They may be in your greater community. So for me here, I don't have any areas that I don't visit at all. So I don't really have a zone 5. I don't have a completely wild area. But I do have a zone 4, and I want to talk about how that looks here. So my raspberries here are going to be a zone 2. I visit them once a day, especially when I'm picking them. And these are fall gold raspberries. The rain has really damaged my roses next to them. We've had very heavy rain. So these produce a crop now, and they will produce a crop again in September, October. And they need to be zone 2 because I visit them frequently, because raspberries are a crop that needs to be harvested a lot. Oh, and I just picked up a little spider on my camera. Let me move it off here. So next, logically, you would move into zone 3, which are going to be things that you visit every couple days or once a week. Or I don't actually move right into that zone. I have a section which I consider my zone 4 right next to my raspberries. So my raspberries, there's a path here. The rain has knocked down my raspberries into the path. And if you string that up, there's a path right here. But right next to it, there is my zone 4. And this is an area I visit very seldom, a couple of times a year. So I'm just a few feet away from my zone 2 area, but I suddenly have an area that's much more wild, and that's where my seaberries are. So Hippophyramnoides, that's the seaberry, also called sea buckthorn, and I only need to visit them once a year to harvest and then to prune. And that's it. They don't need any other care. So they are a very infrequently visited part of what you would consider like a food forest. And I have 3 of them, and I'll talk about them a little bit more as we get down further. Also in this area of the garden, I have this filbert, which is very large. And I also visit it basically once a year to harvest for wood, unless I'm coming in cutting a stake for the garden or for my kids to whittle on. I've talked before, we don't get very many nuts out of it because I don't net it, and so the squirrels get most of the nuts. Underneath it, I keep currants. Again, I'm a big fan of currants and gooseberries for the north side of a tree or shrub because they will still fruit in shade. I also have, this is new, so it's still caged to kind of keep the chickens from scratching the base, a rugosa rose. So once this is established, I have another one that I did in my last video that are down by my figs. You can see how thorny the stems are. They can handle chickens. Obviously, ducks aren't going to damage them because ducks don't scratch. So rugosa rose, definitely something I'm a fan of. The fruit is high in vitamin C. They do sucker a little bit, but that means you can share them with your friends. But they need to be somewhere off the beaten path because they are so thorny. So just like my sea buckthorn, I'm only going to visit my rugosa rose once a year to harvest the hips and to prune it. And so it doesn't need to be it needs to be somewhere away from my path, right? Because it's thorny and because it doesn't need to be utilized very often. So as we're moving through my raspberries here, I'm going to push them up out of the way. The ducks and chickens have gotten in here because I left the gate open. They're not supposed to be in here because right now they will be eating raspberries. Okay, so let's come down here and look at some of my very old ducks. I got a comment about how bedraggled my ducks look. They have, all 3 of the ducks that I have right now have outlived their life expectancy of a typical duck. They're very, very geriatric. So they don't lay that many eggs anymore, but they're very docile and very sweet, and their manure still does the garden good, and they still eat slugs. So we're down here. You can see that there is a young Tibetan cherry, also called a paperbark cherry, that is an ornamental. My friend Eleanor has a gorgeous one in her garden, and I'm always loving her pictures of it. So I put one in. It took me several years to source one. And I put one in, and I want this to become a meditation corner. It's also a part of the yard that is too sunny, and I needed a big shade tree. So this will be a canopy tree when it matures. I have sterile Russian Bocking 14 comfrey all along the fence here, and it is really great duck food. So ducks really, really enjoy feeding off of this plant. When it gets to the end of its bloom cycle, it gets powdery mildew, You can see here it's down to the very tail end of the blossoms. It blooms starting here and works its way down. So when it gets to just the end, it starts to get powdery mildew, and that's when it's telling me it's ready to be cut back. So then I cut it back, I throw it down for mulch all over the garden. So that will be happening in the next couple days. So I don't stress about it. I don't treat it. When it is looking tired and it gets that powdery mildew, it's just communicating to me as a gardener. So I try to think about how plants, sometimes the pests and diseases that they have on them are a way that they're communicating with you, the gardener. And it doesn't necessarily mean they need to be treated. I'm a little distracted by this bee. It doesn't necessarily mean they need to be treated with fungicides or pesticides, or it doesn't necessarily mean they need to be cut out. They're communicating something. So learning to speak that language of the plants. With comfrey, it means twice a year I cut it down to the ground. And then this will bloom again heavily later in the summer. So as we pan over here, you can see my sea buckthorn, which, as I said, is really a zone 4. I don't visit this more than once a year. And sea buckthorn is a nitrogen fixing species that is, as most nitrogen fixers are, it is a plant that likes full sun. So just like my goumyberry likes full sun, and Siberian pea shrub, most of those kind of pioneer species are moving into a really decimated landscape, and they do well in poor soil, sandy or clay, but not a rich humus-filled soil, and they do well in full sun. And in fact, you can see with my sea buckthorn, down low, you will get dieback on the branches where it shades itself. It really likes full sun. So this plant, as its name indicates, sea buckthorn, it can tolerate salty, windy conditions. It can tolerate incredible cold. These are 3 Siberian varieties. There are also German varieties. It can tolerate anything you throw at it except shade. So I had an issue where I had ordered 2 females and a male and was accidentally given 3 males. And I discovered that a couple years in after they started flowering and realized they all had male flowers. So I had to rip them out. And so my 2 new females are 3 years old. They started out as little tiny sticks. And so I don't have fruit yet. I was very frustrated to wait a few years for them to start flowering, only to discover I had all males. So with sea buckthorn, you need a male and up to 6 females it can pollinate. I've read between 6 and 9 females. So kind of like a kiwi that way. They do sucker a little bit, but they do also rip up fairly easily. The suckers come up, I just pull them up. Now, like I said, as with the rugosa roses, the sea buckthorn is very thorny. If you back into it, you'll goose yourself pretty good. So it's a good thing to have tucked away in a corner of the garden you don't visit very often. You'll notice around my sea buckthorns, I grow mint as a cover crop. This is Swiss mint. If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't use this mint here because it gets too tall. And again, my young sea buckthorn don't like to be shaded. I've gotten a lot of requests about growing mint in the ground and to do a video on that, so I'm going to do that. Your mint doesn't have to get out of control, but it is a plant that needs constant maintenance if you don't grow it in a pot. If you do grow it in a pot, it tends to get all kinds of disease problems. So for me, I would rather spend a couple of times a year on maintenance than to have a plant that I am constantly having to fertilize or spray or be bothered by pests and diseases. So this Swiss mint, when it flowers, is just going to be packed with bees a little bit later in the summer. So I promise a mint video. I get so many questions, or comments like, how can you grow mint in the ground? I will cover it, I promise. I have a plant that I had to cut back a ton and move. So this is another service berry here, which I actually was eating off of yesterday. It will get quite a bit bigger. I've just put it here for now. I had to move it from a different place in the garden. In this corner against the chicken coop, you can see my Concord grape, which I love, kind of that free-flowing, messy, organic, wild look to the grapes. So my grape pruning tends to be a little a little, I don't want to say haphazard because I understand how grapes flower and fruit, but it tends to be a little, I like a free-form shape to it. I don't like it to look too tidy. Under that, I have more mints. And I've actually just gotten going a David Austin rose down here. That is a huge rambler, and so it is going to be trained up and over the top of my coop to cover the top plastic, which I don't love, and kind of complement and grow next to my grapes. So that's going to be a big cascade of pink flowers in the spring. Underneath it, I have an Indian plum down here, which is a really good native plant, but the fruit on it is not really something that you want to consume. It's edible, but it's smaller than a cherry, than a cultivated cherry. So it is here as a native plant. Underneath, I have checker lilies, which are also native, but they're done for the year. You can see my grapes here. Grapes are wind pollinated. So sometimes if they're, like you can see back in here, sometimes that means they might only get partially pollinated if they don't have good exposure. Question I see is like, oh, my grapes look like there's in the cluster, they're not evenly pollinated. And a lot of times that's because the grapes are like a little bit overgrown. And if you prune them for more air circulation, I tend to get better pollination that way. So moving over here, we have my high bush cranberry. Underneath there is a Douglas spirea, which is a native also, which I have some thoughts on growing Douglas spirea because it can get a little out of control if you don't know how to keep it in the right spot. Keep it in an area with poor soil. That will help keep it from going crazy. So this is my high bush cranberry. High bush cranberry is actually not a cranberry. It's in the viburnum family. And I got this one from a native's nursery that is now out of business many years ago. And when I ordered it, I had never eaten high bush cranberry. So I'm going to move back here. And I know that low bush cranberries are difficult to grow, particularly if you have poultry. And I thought this would be a good substitute. It's not. Flowers are really pretty, and the fruit my chickens like. I find the fruit slightly bitter and not reminiscent of a real cranberry. Same size and shape, but I don't eat this. It's edible. It's a zombie apocalypse food for me. It has a growth habit of a shrub, much like an elderberry. The leaves are quite pretty, but it kind of has that ugly, so if you prune it here, it throws out new branches perpendicular to where you cut it. So you can see right here, I cut this back, and then the new branch is almost perpendicular. So that makes it kind of ugly. When you prune it, it can be difficult to have it be attractive. It also gets much taller than I thought it would, 15, 20 feet. So if I had it to do over again, I would put it way back against the fence or just not grow it at all. Except that again, the pollinators really love it in the spring. Behind it, I have a gummy berry, which is ridiculously full of fruit. As you've seen from my other videos, gummy berry Elaeagnus multiflora, edible fruit. I use it a lot for chicken food. So, again, it doesn't like shade, so it gets a little leggy here just because the high bush cranberry is a little too big. So I keep having to cut it back where it wants to shoot for the sun over into my neighbor's yard. And if I had it to do over again, I probably wouldn't put this here. However, it does a great job of fixing nitrogen for the tree next to it, which is a tree that I absolutely adore and a tree I've had to be very, very patient with. So we're going to end here. There is a lilac back here, and I have a blue elder that got cane borer that I've had to cut all the way back to the ground, and I'm hoping to rehab it. And I have some black currants tucked under and natives like Oregon iris and things like that. But I want to spend the last few minutes focusing on this tree. So we're down here next to the chicken coop. So there's a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. We got seconds cedar siding at the rebuilding center when we resided this. So like next to nothing to reside it. So there's a lot of nitrogen from that. There's nitrogen from the gummy berry getting fixed in the soil, particularly when I prune it and throw the prunings down. This is my early Fuyu persimmon, and it is the only Asian persimmon I have. I have a hybrid, Nikita's Gift, in the front yard. Early Fuyu is self-fertile, And I put it in because I really love persimmons. I feel like they taste like brown sugar. This is a non-astringent persimmon, so you can eat it rock hard, sliced like an apple, or you can let it get soft and jelly-like. I particularly like it soft, scooped out and cooked in a bundt cake or quick bread. I think it adds a note. It's very different than cooking something with applesauce. It's really, really special. So I make a persimmon bundt cake at the holidays. That's a really special fruit. So the fruit, again, to a Western palate, it has no acid in it. So it's just pure sugar, really high Brix. So you may or may not like it because we're used to a little bit of acid in there. But I think it's just a delicious, it's like nature's candy, right? So early Fuyu persimmon, this tree is 9 years old. And you've seen from some of my earlier videos, some of my apple trees that are 9 and 10 years old are huge. This, I can still get my hands around the trunk of this tree. Persimmons are notoriously slow getting going. When I bought this tree, I was told to expect to wait 7 years till I got fruit. And that's true. Year 7, it finally fruited. So the last 2 years I've gotten fruit on it. What I've read is that it can kind of be an alternate bearer. A lot of persimmons can be like that. If you don't thin them particularly, they can bear really heavily one year and not so much the next. So persimmons are slow growing. You have to be really patient, but they're just such a lovely tree. I wanted this to be a quiet corner. I want this tree to get big and be a spectacular tree in the corner of my yard, like a little hidden nook. Particularly in the fall when the leaves turn vibrant colors and drop their leaves, and then this makes big persimmons, big orange fruit are hanging all over the tree. It's just gorgeous. So I love having that hidden corner of the garden. Persimmons, when they leaf out in the spring, are very lime green, and they leaf out late. And sometimes folks can think there might be a disease with their tree because the leaves are very pale. That's just the nature of this tree when it leaves out. So again, if you want to grow persimmon, just be patient, but I think it's worth it, particularly because I think they taste so much better than store-bought persimmons, especially if you're coming out here after a frost. You have a light frost and you come pick your persimmons off. They are incredibly sweet. So I hope that gives you a good view and a little idea of what this last section of the chicken run looks like. A little bit about, if there's one thing I want to get across in my videos, it's that permaculture is meant to make life for people easier and regenerative for us and for the planet. And so if it feels stressful, if it builds up anxiety for you to have to follow design principles in permaculture, you're not doing permaculture right. So really listen to your body and listen to what it's telling you. If you feel so rigidly bound to putting in an herb spiral or not having straight rows or feeling like you have to grow a token permaculture plant because it's what permaculturists do, I want to encourage you that that's not how it's meant to be. And being in your garden should be something that gives you delight and that you enjoy and that feeds your mental well-being and your soul as much as it feeds your body. So just really be listening to your body and what's going on with it when you're out in the garden, and know that it should be a freeing experience. It should be an experience that makes life better for you, enriches your life. So don't feel beholden to rules and obligations. Listen to what your site is telling you. Listen to what your wildlife on your property is telling you. Listen to what your plants are telling you. And make sure that it is a process that is enriching for you. More than it is a set of rules, it is a set of principles to help guide you. But you are still the gardener. You are still the one interacting with your site, and you know better than a book or a YouTuber or someone who says that they're an expert. Get to know your site and you know it best. So for me, that has meant bending a lot of the quote unquote rules of permaculture. And as you can see, I still have lush and abundant, productive systems that promote wildlife and sustainability. So thanks for tuning in to this section of my garden tour. I will be back tomorrow, or it might be the next day, with the last section. And we will be discussing the shade garden and some garden rehabbing projects. And then that will be the end of my garden tour for 2020, but I will still be cranking out videos all summer. So if there's a topic you would like me to cover, please let me know in the comments. And please be sure and subscribe to this channel if you get something out of these videos. It would mean a lot to me. All right, thanks.